I can't remember if it's pronounced Benoit, like French style, or Benoit.
Oh, sacre bleu!
There's been a lot in the news this year regarding Vince McMahon allegations of sex trafficking and assault. Holy sex trafficking? This is a wrestling script, obviously. Kevin wrote it. I've got no idea about wrestling. I don't care. I haven't followed any of this news about Vince McMahon, whose surname I desperately want to read, McMahon. But look, I don't know. Sex trafficking, that's pretty serious stuff. It's like allegations of sexual assault. You're like, yeah, I mean Hollywood, that happens every day. Sex trafficking, though, slightly different. I'm not trying to say that, oh God, I've got myself into a trouble here, haven't I? Because I've said like, oh, well, sex trafficking is worse than sexual assault, and that's apparently something you can't say, even though one is like slavery. Since that's still a developing story and everything is just allegations, we're not going to be talking about that scandal today. Okay, good, because I want to have a fun time and not talk about modern slavery. Yes! Instead, we're taking a look at some of McMahon's other scandals and controversies. I know you've never really watched wrestling, Simon. You're goddamn right, Kevster. And don't seem to understand the appeal. You're goddamn right, Kevster. But it's pretty easy to explain. Okay, Kevster. Basically, wrestling is just a soap opera where people get punched in the face, body slammed, and hit with steel chairs. The outcome of the matches may be predetermined, but what happens in the ring is a genuine display of incredible athleticism and showmanship. Yeah, although, to be honest, I'm like not a sports person, I'm not a fighting person, I'm definitely not a soap opera person. Soap operas, I'm not sure if they're popular in the US. I think they must be, right? But we get shows EastEnders, Coronation Street, and then there's the Australian ones, Neighbours, and Home and Away. And it's just literally just people's lives, and it goes on forever. I never understood the appeal. It's extremely boring. They're churned out way too quickly, and the acting kind of sucks. So that's soap operas in my opinion, but for some reason people love them. Never got it. And if they're just going to be wrestling each other, I don't get it even more. But I guess I do get it slightly more because then at least there's like something to it. There's like something more interesting than just like, oh yeah, Stacey's down the pub again. It's like, okay, who gives a shit? This video is brought to you by longtime friends of the show and today's sponsor, Squarespace. Yes, please. What is Squarespace? Well, look, if you do anything that needs a website, I don't know, maybe you want to sell widgets online. Maybe you're a photographer and you want to showcase your beautiful portfolio. Maybe you're an internet fact boy and you want to link to all of your various YouTube channels. Well, if you're doing that, you must be doing it with Squarespace. Look, they take any idea. You've got an idea for something, I don't know, like my website or your, a shop, a portfolio, anything like that. You go over to Squarespace, no coding required, no design skills required. Two things I absolutely don't have, and I still managed to make a website with Squarespace. They've got Fluid Engine, which is a drag and drop editor. Basically, you take a beautiful template that they provide. They got all this like beautiful options. You choose one, then you customize it with Fluid Engine. It's next generation drag and drop stuff to make it exactly how you want it. Looks perfect, and you can do it in an afternoon. It's really that easy. It's super easy. I can't think of any other word to describe it other than like, I mean, if you're an idiot, you could do it. Plus, other stuff they do, as I mentioned, you can run a shop on there, which is cool. Sell some stuff online. Speaking of selling stuff online, Squarespace also do courses. So you can make a course, pick a layout, upload your videos, and voila, it's online and it's ready to go. You can price it how you want. You can do a subscription if you want, whatever. Squarespace, it's super flexible. So when you're ready to get started, go to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Blaze to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain using the code BLAZE. Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring, and now back to today's episode. But it's what happens outside the ring that often gets the most attention. There are love triangles, betrayals, and even wrestlers who came back from the grave. It's through these stories that the real stars are made. The Rock, John Cena, and Triple H didn't become the stars they are because they're particularly skilled technical wrestlers. It's because they are great entertainers who were so skilled on the mic. It's like me. I don't know anything. I'm just good at being on a microphone. That's my only thing. Or in Triple H's case, because he was banging the boss's daughter, so he could just ask his daddy-in-law to give him the title again. But speaking of wrestling, I have no idea what any of this is about. Like, okay, Trust you on this one, Kevin. You could be making stuff up and I would have no idea. But speaking of wrestling promos, since we have that three-way cage match coming up next, Members Only Blaze, it's time for me to teach the audience a little mathematics. You know, they say that all men are created equal, but you look at me and you look at Blind Dave and you can see that that statement is not true. See, normally, if you go one-on-one with another writer, you've got a 50-50 chance of winning. But I'm a genetic freak and I'm not normal, so you've got a 25% at best to beat me. Oh, okay, Kevin. Okay, Kevin. Big, scary Kevin. I don't get, maybe Kevin is big and scary. I've only ever seen Kevin on a screen. Kevin, how tall are you?
And I'm proud to be a midget. The only thing more intense than my midget pride is my hate for tall people, or as we like to call them, biggers.
Then you add Liam to the mix and your chances of winning drastically go down. See, at the three-way on the live Blaze, you've got a 33.5 chance of winning, but I've got a 66 2/3 chance of winning because Liam knows he can't beat me and he's not even going to try. What? So, Dave, you take your 33 1/3 chance minus my 25% chance, and you've got an 8 1/3 chance of winning on the live Blaze. Kevin, I have no idea what's going on. But then you take my 75 chance of winning, and if you go one-on-one, then add 66 2/3%. I've got a 141 chance of a 2/3 chance of winning, and see, Dave, the numbers don't lie. They spell disaster for you. I've got no idea, Kevin. This is like the other day I was looking up, I think it was odds of the presidential election, the US presidential election this year, and it was giving me these numbers like 12/3. And I'm like, just give me a percentage. What does 12/3 even mean? Now imagine that being said by someone who is so jacked his biceps have biceps, is wearing sunglasses indoors, and is also wearing a chainmail hood for no discernible reason. Holy shit, that sounds heavy. This is professional wrestling, and it is often, at times, hysterical. With my fanboying and memes out of the way, let's get to the controversies before Simon falls asleep. Okay. I had no idea what all those, like, 66 1/3, 141 1, blah, blah, blah. It was like, Kevin, you sound like an auctioneer. United States and McMahon. Until his current and ongoing legal troubles regarding trafficking, the 1994 case United States and McMahon is the closest thing that McMahon has come to real legal peril. If you look at pictures of professional wrestlers from the 1980s and the early 1990s, with very few exceptions, they're all enormous. You weren't going to reach the heights of stardom in those days of the WWF as a cruiserweight performing acrobatic moves off the top of the rope. It was all about having the biggest and strongest looking guys possible, and that was easy to accomplish in the 1980s because anabolic steroids were legal. I was in the gym the other day and my trainer was like, yeah, one of the gym trainers got fired because apparently he was like shooting up his clients if they wanted with steroids in the back of the gym, and I'm like, god damn. And I am at the gym and I'm like, is that guy on steroids? And my trainer's just like, and he's a pretty jacked guy. He doesn't have like steroids, but you look at some monster of a guy and he's like, no doubt, my dude, no doubt. Look at the guy. That's a steroid dude. But that all changed when steroids were made illegal under the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1988. This bill was part of the US's war on drugs, and apparently the government wanted to take the war seriously because the Anti-Drug Abuse Act also reinstated the federal death penalty that had been abolished in 1972. Shit, I had no idea. Wait, the federal death penalty was abolished, then brought back for drugs? Then in 1990, it probably wasn't for drugs, it was just in the same act, right? Then they're not executing people for being drug dealers, right? Even like El Chapo, he's not going to get executed for being a drug trafficker. Then in 1990, steroids were classified as a controlled substance, which made them subject to stronger laws and penalties. Of course, while I said that everything changed when that bill was passed, obviously it didn't, since when has anyone let the law stand between them and success? Yeah, like obviously steroids are illegal, obviously steroids are everywhere.
They're everywhere! They're everywhere!
There was no explicit policy, but everybody knew that McMahon wanted all of his wrestlers on steroids and that there was no work for guys who weren't absolutely swole. That was the perception anyway, and it was opinion shared by everyone in the company. Since this perception didn't change along with the law, everybody just kept on using steroids. The US Department of Justice didn't care for all of that shit though, and in 1991, Dr. George Zahorian was convicted for illegally supplying people with steroids. Zahorian had worked with the WWF as their ringside doctor, and evidence tied the doctor's drug shipments directly to Hulk Hogan and Rowdy Roddy Piper. Yeah, I mean, dude, if you're a doctor, don't be prescribing people steroids to make them massive. Be prescribing them steroids when they have, like, asthma or something like that. It came out during the trial that he shipped steroids directly to McMahon's office as well. Zahorian was convicted on 12 counts and received 3 years in prison and a $12,700 fine. He's probably not too worried about that fine when he's off to prison for 3 years. That probably could have been a lot more, but he agreed to cooperate with the prosecution and try to take down McMahon. I'm sure the prosecutors thought this was a major win. They had the doctor who was convicted of prescribing steroids to the WWF wrestlers on their side, so how could they possibly lose? Let me guess. McMahon's f***ing rich and he's got some bomb-ass lawyers.
What up, G?
Well, by being absolutely terrible, that's how. There were a lot of things people could have gone after McMahon for. Even back in 1993, there were allegations from a former employee that McMahon had sexually assaulted her, as well as other claims of sexual abuse within the WWF. And of course, there's the whole issue of miscategorizing wrestlers as independent contractors rather than employees to avoid giving them any sorts of benefits like reasonable healthcare. I'm sure the people who got sexually assaulted allegedly were like, yes, and my healthcare I want. Sorry. It's a pretty joke. But of all the things the US government could have gone after, this was the flimsiest possible case. Not because wrestlers weren't still using steroids, but because they were trying to convict McMahon of distributing them. That is very much not how this would work in practice. Former wrestling industry legend and current bitter old man yelling at clouds, Jim Cornette, explained this really well, quoting, "If McMahon was running a sumo wrestling troupe and everybody had to weigh 600 pounds, he wouldn't be the fit one physically handing them the cheeseburgers." Of the 6 charges against McMahon, 3 were thrown out by the judge before trial. McMahon was tried for 2 counts of distributing steroids and 1 count of conspiracy to distribute. In the trial, it was an absolute disaster. The prosecution did such a horrible job that McMahon's defense team didn't even call a single witness. Holy shit, that's confidence. It's like, yeah, no, we don't need any witnesses. I mean, look, you did a lousy job. We're not going to even bother. This ain't going anywhere. They cross-examined a bunch of the prosecution's witnesses, all of whom said that yes, they took steroids, but no, they did not get them directly from McMahon, nor did he explicitly tell them to take steroids. Dude, this guy has done the whole, like, you know, don't get your hands dirty when someone else can. Like, keep your hands clean. He read that 48 Laws of Power, didn't he? Keep your hands clean. That was the entirety of the defense, and it was more than enough. Before the jury was allowed to deliberate, the judge dismissed the 2 distribution charges because the prosecution hadn't shown evidence that any of the claims took place in the jurisdiction where it was being tried. Even though the WWF's offices where Zahorian sent steroids were in Connecticut, the DOJ decided to try the case in New York because they thought the distribution happened on Long Island. The jury acquitted McMahon of the conspiracy to distribute charge. Of course, the acquittal was hardly the last time this trial would come up. It is often seen as McMahon's largest scandal, or at least it was until this year, and it became shockingly relevant during his wife Linda McMahon's 2010 run for US Senate. During Linda's campaign, a memo she wrote dated December 1st, 1989 suddenly resurfaced. Oh, you gotta be careful about running for Senate if you've got skeletons, whatever they might be. That was shortly before Zahorian was indicted for illegally distributing steroids, something that a federal prosecutor reportedly warned a WWF lawyer was on the horizon. The memo stated, "Although you and I discussed before about continuing to have Zahorian act at our events as the doctor on call, I think that is now not a good idea. Vince agreed and would like for you to call Zahorian to tell him not to come to any more of our events and to also clue him in on any action that the Justice Department is thinking of taking." The note ends. While I doubt this later scandal contributed much, if at all, to Linda failing to get elected, the original memo did at least provide us with a pretty funny moment. Thanks to being tipped off, when authorities went to arrest Zahorian, they found him in his office trying to shred all of the documents tying him to WWF, where he's literally in there. It's like a movie. The timing lines up so perfectly. Handler wrestling deaths. It was May the 23rd, 1999. I was a junior in high school, and my friends had come over that night to watch the WWF Over the Edge pay-per-view event. The match card wasn't particularly exciting, but my friends and I watched every pay-per-view event back then, since it was just a couple of bucks each if we were hanging out and watching the show together. Unfortunately, there was a disaster before one of the matches. On the undercard, it was a title match for the Intercontinental title. Oh, dude, cards, undercards, titles, bro. Pay-per-view being $2. The only reference I have for that is, like, wasn't that Jake Paul and whoever he fought? Jake Paul's the wrestler, right? Not Logan Paul. Logan Paul's the alleged scammer. Jake Paul is the wrestler, right? And it was like $60 to watch him fight someone.
Attention shoppers, outside today we have Cripple Fight outside.
The reigning champion was the Godfather, the WWF's resident pimp who came to the ring accompanied by a dozen or so various hoes, played by strippers from local clubs wherever they happened to be filming. His challenger was Owen Hart in costume as the Blue Blazer, a parody of both superhero and wrestling tropes. The plan was for Owen to descend from the ceiling into the ring on a harness, something that was commonly done by the wrestler Sting in WCW. Once he was a few feet above the ring, there was supposed to be a fake malfunction that would cause Owen's descent to stall before dropping him the last few feet into the ring. Using harnesses like this was hardly unheard of, and they had even done a test run at a show a week earlier, though without the malfunctioning gag. However, on the night of the pay-per-view, they used a different setup for the harness than the previous attempt, and it wound up releasing Owen when he was still about 80 feet in the air. 80 feet's like 30 meters? Something like that? Holy shit, that is a fall. That's it. 30-meter fall, you gotta die, right? He fell directly onto the top rope and landed in the ring, dying on impact. Wait, was this on live TV? Now, I'm not blaming this tragic death on McMahon, nor has he ever really been accused of being responsible. That's not the part of this that was considered so scandalous. The scandal was that McMahon decided that they should just scrape Owen's body off of the ring and continue with the rest of the show. That is, I understand like the business behind that, but holy shit, dude, it's not a good look. I get that it's a tough position to be in, and they say the show must go on, but while it is rare, athletes dying during an event is not unprecedented. As a matter of common decency, whenever this happened, the remainder of the event is usually cancelled. Wasn't that football player who died? Like recently, or maybe a year ago, a couple of years ago? He was just like on the pitch and he had a heart attack. And did he die? Something terrible happened. And I can't imagine they continued with the match. They're just like, oh yeah, get one of the subs in. Or maybe they did, I don't know. Just to be clear, since I know it was a billion-dollar company with lots of employees, this was absolutely McMahon's decision to make. He was owner, CEO, and was an extremely hands-on boss who exerted total creative control over their shows. Absolutely nothing happened without his approval. McMahon's decision to keep the show going was extremely controversial, and it pissed off Owens' family, the fans, and the wrestlers who very much didn't want to have to continue performing that night. Yeah, very understandably. But hey, McMahon is able to learn from his mistakes, or so he thought. It turns out he was just going to make a different mistake next time. On Sunday, the 24th of June 2007, wrestler Chris Benoit and his family were found dead in their home in Fayetteville, Georgia. If that name sounds familiar, it's because you recorded a Casual Criminalist episode about the incident. Yes! As soon as the news broke, the that's another show that I do, if you want to check it out, by the way. There's a whole universe of programs. As soon as the news broke, the WWE, as this was after the company's name change, announced that they were cancelling the live taping of Monday Night Raw the next night and would instead air a hastily put together 3-hour tribute to Benoit's life and career. I can't remember if it's pronounced Benoit, like French style, or Benoit.
Oh, sacre bleu!
No, it doesn't matter to me. I'm not a wrestling guy. And I am a video presenting guy. Maybe I should make more of an effort. That would be a thing, wouldn't it? And I'm sure it seemed like a good idea at the time. McMahon had waited too long in showing Owen Hart the respect he deserved, and he certainly wouldn't want to make that mistake again. However, he probably should have waited for the full details of Benoit's death to come out before going ahead with the tribute, because those details weren't going to wait until his show had finished airing. At about the 2-hour mark into the WWE's tribute to Benoit, the news broke of what really occurred, and it quickly spread to every wrestling fan around the country. Fans were shocked to discover that they were in the middle of a 3-hour tribute to a man who had spent the previous weekend murdering his wife and child before taking his own life. Holy shit. I mean, I knew where this was going, but still, holy shit. Admittedly, this mistake was much more forgivable. There was no way for McMahon to know what had happened, and while we can debate whether or not they should have waited until the Thursday night show to do a tribute, I can certainly understand their decision. Even so, the fact that the news broke during the tribute show led to this being one of the biggest scandals the WWE has ever faced, and they've never acknowledged Benoit's existence since that day. Muhammad Hassan. I've already specified that McMahon had total creative control over the WWE. Every gimmick, every storyline, and the outcome of every match required personal approval from McMahon himself. Dude, you're running a big-ass company. Do you really need to be making those little small I mean, really? Like, storylines? I run a tiny little company, and I'm not like, yo, Kevin, change up paragraph 6! I mean, I do with, like, new writers who come to work for me, but Kevin's been writing scripts forever. It's like, Kevin, just do your thing, man. You got it. I don't need, like, to give you feedback. You're doing your thing, bro. He was the ultimate micromanager. I just want you to keep that in mind while we go over the insanity that was the character Muhammad Hassan. It was 2004, and the WWE decided they wanted to have an Arab wrestler that could headline events. They sent scouts to Ohio Valley Wrestling, one of the smaller federations that essentially served as a farm league for the WWE, and it was there that they found Mark Kapani. Not the most Arabic sounding. Are they gonna like whatever the Arabic version of blackface is? They gonna like blackface this dude in 2004? Dude. If that doesn't sound like an Arabic name to you, that's because he was Italian. But his skin was tan enough, and he was willing to do the accent, so McMahon had found his Muhammad Hassan. Oh, dude, no.
Hakka sherpa sherpa. A bacala. Oh, durka durka durka.
I mean, they didn't blackface him, but dude. Why not just find an Arabic dude? At first, the character was less offensive than you'd expect from the WWE. His initial gimmick was trying to fight against the prejudice and negative stereotypes that had plagued him and other Americans of Middle Eastern descent since 9/11. That had plagued him, being of Middle Eastern descent. He's a tan dude from Italy. His manager, Daivari, was an Iranian American whose job was to accompany Hassan and translate everything he said to Persian. After a couple of months of performing in dark matches and at house shows, non-televised shows whose events aren't even considered canon, Hassan finally made his television debut in December 2004, and it was a massive success. Fans hated him in the exact way that they were supposed to, and McMahon wanted to give the character a major push. Of course, being a heel, that's a bad guy. I know that, Kevin. I'm like, you've done enough scripts that I know what a heel is. It's a weird way to call a bad guy. In wrestling, is a lot like being an extremist political pundit. Sure, you were able to rile up your audience, but if you want to keep riling them up, then you need to push the envelope further and further, as the fans is. The right-wing pundits is a very nice analog there, Kevin. Bravo. As the months progressed, the character of Hassan started to become more radicalized. It became less of a story about fighting prejudice in the wake of 9/11 and more an experiment to see how much they could make him seem like a terrorist. He's like, initially, like, not all Arabs liked 9/11, and 3 years later, I did 9/11! There were big plans. That's definitely going to get clipped, isn't it? There were big plans with the more radicalized version of Hassan, and McMahon intended to make him the world heavyweight champion in August of 2005 at the pay-per-view SummerSlam. The event was taking place in Washington, D.C., and Hassan was scheduled to defeat D.C. native David Bautista to take the title. It was all planned to be a giant you to the United States by having a fake Arab wrestler win the title in the nation's capital while defeating their local hero. Unfortunately for Hassan, his career wasn't going to make it to August. The WWE's two big shows were Monday Night Raw, which aired live, at Thursday Night SmackDown. SmackDown was usually taped on Tuesday, though sometimes segments or even the entire show could be taped on Monday after Raw. On July the 4th, 2005, because there are no holidays for professional wrestlers, they taped a squash match between Hassan's manager, Daivari, and The Undertaker. The actual match lasted about 20 seconds, with Daivari easily being laid out. Wait, in squash? It's not necessarily a sport that it's beneficial to be massive. It's a sport where it's beneficial to be very agile.
You take me to him! Take me to the son of a bitch! Take me to him! Come on!
After the match, Hassan smiled, dropped to his knees on the entrance ramp, and raised his hands in prayer to Allah. The character would basically do this every match, but this time, his prayers were answered. 5 masked men, dressed like terrorists, suddenly appeared in the ring and beat the shit out of The Undertaker, hitting him with clubs until he fell to the ground and was choked out with piano wire. They then carried Daivari out of the ring above their heads, similar to a martyr's funeral. At face value, this whole sketch was a pretty terrible idea. I understand McMahon's desire to monetize outrage, but this was still in extraordinarily poor taste. No shit, dude.
You and God versus me!
Unfortunately, it got much, much worse. Oh God, Kevin, where are we going? On the morning of Thursday, July the 7th, the day that the episode of SmackDown would air, Islamist terrorist coordinator... Oh no, the London bombings. The London bombings. for attacks on London's public transportation, killing 52 civilians and injuring 784 more. That evening's episode of SmackDown aired in the US and Canada unedited, though Daivari's match was removed from the European broadcast. Even if the footage didn't air in the UK, the fact that it aired at all is considered by many to be one of the most controversial decisions in WWE history. It didn't help that, although most wrestling fans understood that SmackDown was taped in advance, the public at large seemed to be under the impression it aired live.
I may be an idiot, but I'm not stupid.
The network and its advertisers demanded that Muhammad Hassan never appear on screen again, and that was pretty much the end of it. At the next pay-per-view, he was written out of the WWE by being fake hospitalized with grievous wounds in a match against The Undertaker. God, they really backpedaled on this one. Get hard, didn't they? With his character effectively dead, Mark Kapani quit wrestling and went back to college to become a teacher. Good for him.
He was special.
The Montreal screwjob. While the other scandals all wound up getting mainstream media coverage, this last story was pretty much limited to the wrestling world. That said, I couldn't possibly omit it from this episode, as it's possibly the biggest scandal in all of professional wrestling history. In August of 1997, Bret the Hitman Hart, older brother of Owen Hart, means nothing to me, became a 5-time WWF World Heavyweight Champion. Which should mean nothing to anyone, right? Because it's all staged. However, this was a time of great financial instability for the WWF, who were losing market share to rival federation WCW. Never heard of it, but why do they have to have so many W's? W is such a hard letter to say. This gave WCW the opportunity to poach talent from WWF, and Bret was one of the wrestlers targeted. At the end of October that year, 1 week before McMahon's next pay-per-view, Bret signed with WCW. He was going to start working with them in December, which meant McMahon only had a month to take the belt away from Bret. McMahon wanted him to drop the title the next week at the pay-per-view, but Bret refused. His opponent for the match was Shawn Michaels, with whom Bret was having a real-life feud. Now, it's all complicated thing, but the two kept getting into very real physical fights backstage. It didn't help that the pay-per-view was being held in Bret's home country of Canada, and Michaels' gimmick at the time involved making fun of Canadians and desecrating the Canadian flag. Holy that's so intense. I don't think the Canadians care about it as much as the Americans. Like, if someone was like, hey, Whistle, I'm going to really piss you off. Look, here I am wiping my ass with the Union Jack. I'd just be like, all right, I don't give a but I feel like Americans would get upset if I was wiping my ass with the Stars and Stripes. I don't know, like, Americans love their flag, I feel, more than other countries. So I don't give a shit. Basically, Bret said he wanted to be on good terms with the company and that he was more than happy to give up the title before he left, just not in Canada and not to Michaels. It wasn't an unreasonable request by any means, especially since Bret had been wrestling with the company for 14 years at that point, but McMahon was paranoid. 2 years earlier, the WWF had accidentally let the contract of Deborah Maselli, aka Alundra Blaze, lapse while she was still the WWF Women's Champion. Not only was she still the champion, but she still had the physical belt in her possession. Maselli was promptly signed by WCW, and her first appearance on their show, Monday Nitro, included her throwing the WWF Women's title into a trash can live on air. McMahon couldn't let something like that happen again, so rather than trust Bret not to be an asshole, he decided to be an asshole himself. Yes, on brand, allegedly.
Where's the son of a... Where is he?
That night before the pay-per-view, McMahon and his lackeys Patterson and Briscoe met in secret with Michaels in a hotel room. There they agreed on a plan to screw over Bret and give the belt to Michaels. But as far as Bret and everyone else knew, he was going to be walking out of the arena as champion still. The match was supposed to end in a disqualification, and Bret would give up the title the next week on Monday Night Raw. The next night, the match began as planned, and I'm not going to bore you with the details of everything that happens. The important part is that the ref got knocked unconscious, after which Michaels used Bret's own signature submission hold against him. There was supposed to be this whole thing with a second ref and a bunch of other wrestlers entering the ring that would all lead to the disqualification, but instead the original ref suddenly got up and yelled, "Ring the bell," at the timekeeper. The timekeeper was confused since Bret hadn't tapped out, at which point McMahon, who was ringside for the match, yelled, "Ring the fucking bell," at the timekeeper. The bell rang just as Bret broke out of the hold, and he already knew he had been screwed. Michaels fled the ring with the belt while fans in the front row tried to assault him, and Bret spit in McMahon's face. Got real, didn't it? This wasn't scripted. I like it.
Versus me, Vincent Kennedy McMahon, and the product of my semen.
The crowd also began hurling every ounce of trash in the arena directly at McMahon. Bret went on a rampage, destroying cameras and monitors, then went backstage to find McMahon, who at this point was locked in his office with Patterson and Briscoe hiding out and possibly peeing themselves like cowards. Allegedly. Eventually, everybody got together in the dressing room to try and talk things out. There was McMahon and his crew on one side, Bret and his crew on the other, and Michaels in the corner with The Undertaker watching over him to make sure he didn't make things worse by opening his mouth. When McMahon tried to explain why he did what he did, Bret told him to shut up and leave or he was going to get punched. Rather than leaving, McMahon said, "I'm going to give you one." One was all it took, and after a right hook to the temple, Bret sent McMahon straight to the ground. Yeah, not surprisingly, because McMahon is a businessman and Bret is a beast of a wrestler. It's just a shame that was all real drama, so this confrontation never made it to air. Even though McMahon was just as roided out as any of his wrestlers and did frequently appear in the ring. Okay, I didn't know that. He's also a beast of a man then. Okay, fans never had the satisfaction of seeing that have to take a real punch from someone. And that's where we end today's episode of wrestling, which, despite knowing nothing about wrestling, I found rather entertaining. Thanks, Kevster, and I'll see you next time. You're goddamn right, Kevster. I don't seem to understand the appeal. You're goddamn right, Kevster.